Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Now, let's give a warm welcome to our main speaker, Harvey.
Hi, my name is Harvey, and I'm an alcoholic. I've been called a lot of things, so it doesn't really make any difference. Just make sure to call me. I'll tell you in a general way what I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm like today. I won't get too specific. We don't have the time. I'm going to tell you that Stan talked about the fear, and I remember that. I know that fear. I had an illness as a child, and I didn't walk until I was about 6.5, and so I'd always felt less than. But my biggest fear as a kid, and this is really the only thought that I remember as a child, was fear of getting out of bed in the morning, because I knew what a fraud I was, and I knew that everybody was going to find that out, and as soon as I got out of bed, everybody would know, and that fear carried with me well into my adulthood, well into my sobriety for that matter too. And that was always the biggest thing. I, too, came from what's called a functional family. It was not a dysfunctional family, although I have started an organization called ACA, Adult Children of Assholes, because that's what my parents were. And my mother, God love her, is going to be 87 years old in September, and still is, you know, just... I call her every morning. She lives about 100 miles away. I call her every morning just to make sure she gets up, you know, and my brother calls her every evening. It's just kind of a thing that we do. And I don't know, she never lets up. She just drives me crazy. Anyway, 2 weeks after my 12th birthday, I got drunk for the first time. I've never had a drink. You know, I heard somebody in Alcoholics Anonymous once say that the imaginary line into alcoholism was their lips. And I think that's what it was with me, you know, because I have never done one of anything. I've never done a drink. I've never had a drink. I remember a group of us used to buy a bottle, and we'd get there, and you know, and somebody would take it and take a hit and pass it down and take a hit and pass it down, and it'd get to me, and I'd walk away with it. You know, I'd be at a party, and somebody lit a joint, and they'd pass it, and it'd come down to me, and I'd say thank you and walk away. It's the way I always was. I'll never forget in the 70s, I was at a meeting one time, and in those days, what we did at meetings, where there were 8 of us in the meeting, and the guy who was hosting the meeting laid out 8 very careful manicured lines of cocaine on this little mirror, and he did a line, and he handed it to me, and I did the next 7, and everybody was looking at me, and I couldn't understand what the problem was. I just couldn't understand. I couldn't understand that. But anyway, I started drinking at 12.5, 2 weeks after my 12th birthday. Jack Daniels. I love Jack Daniels. Yeah. Just love Jack. I still love the smell of Jack Daniels. You know, when I had 9 months of sobriety, I explored the possibility of starting a men's aftershave lotion in the aroma. Just, I mean, I'm still thrilled by the smell of it, except for my sponsor reminded me, or said to me, that not everybody felt that way about Jack Daniels. I was appalled. You know, he was a Scotch drinker, and I almost got a new sponsor for that. And I love being drunk. You know, it was wonderful, because what it did for me was, see, this fear came out in a couple of ways. I was always on edge, but this fear came out in rage. I was always full of rage. My fear is manifested by rage. And what Jack Daniels did for me was it stopped the rage. It didn't stop the fear, but it stopped the rage. And I was always kind of a mellow drunk. I didn't get in fights. I didn't push people around. I didn't do any of that. I started smoking dope when I was about 15, and I basically went through college smoking dope and drinking beer and taking an occasional upper when I needed to be up all night, you know, for something important, which never included any kind of a school activity, you know. And that was it. And, you know, I'm not going to bore you with a long drunkalog. I'm going to give you a typical day of what I did. I'd get up in the morning. This is when I started working and I was functioning on a daily basis. I'd get up in the morning, and at that point, I had found this drug that would allow me to get out of bed in the morning, you know. Actually, it allowed me to spring out of bed in the morning, and I'd pack my nose with this stuff. And as you can tell, my nose is kind of large, so a lot went up it, you know. Houses and cars and stuff like that. And then that would get me in the shower, and then I'd get downstairs for my morning cup of coffee, and I found God's second greatest gift after Jack Daniels. It was a pill called Val Release. It is no longer on the market, guys, and I'm really sorry that you didn't get to experience this. This was an amazing pill. It kept 5 milligrams of Valium in your body on a 24-hour time release basis. Whew. And I would take 6 or 7 of those with my morning cup of coffee. And then I would take 4 Fiorinol with codeine number 4s for the headache I knew was coming on, you know. And then I'd drive to work. And I pitied the people either in front of me or in back of me, whichever drug kicked in first, you know, and I just drive on, you know. Because I was either real fast or real slow, and it didn't, you know, just the way it went. And then I'd get into my office. My office was on the Sunset Strip. I was a business manager in the entertainment industry at the time. And I had my office up there, and I'd be at work, and I'd be there every day until 11:30. And then 11:30, I'd walk the 300 feet to my favorite restaurant and bar, a place called the Cock and Bull up on Sunset Boulevard. Wonderful place. I love that place. Had my own stool there, you know, third from the end. Never forget the guy at the corner stool, Frank Ferguson, an old character actor, you know, and I can break Frank's anonymity because he didn't get sober, so the hell with him, you know. Old Frank died, you know, and when he died, what they did was they put a little brass plaque on the bar where he drank, you know, here drank Frank. And that was my goal. When I died, I wanted to figure out something to rhyme with Harvey and put it on the bar, you know, and I've outlived that damn place. But anyway, I'd be there every day from 11:30 to 1:30. Then I'd go back to work, then I'd be back up there from 3:30 to 5. And then I'd go back to work, and I'd get back up there about 7:30, and I'd stay however late, you know, for however long it took that night, whatever the definition of it was, and I never knew. And I was not a heavy drinker. This was a heavy drinking bar. This was a real heavy drinking bar. I was not a heavy drinker, you know. I did 6 drinks an hour. It's all I could do. There were guys in there doing 8, 10, and 12 drinks an hour, you know, but I did my 6, and that was it. And bartender knew every 10 minutes had another drink there just waiting for me. And that's what I did. And I basically did that for 12 and a half years, day in and day out. It was my prescription to live. It was the reason that I was able to build a business and to become somewhat successful, and that's what I did. And then after 12 and a half years, I started to abuse alcohol and drugs. And I don't know why. I don't know what triggered it. I have no idea what it was. But I just started to abuse it, you know, and whatever I was doing, it was just much more than that. And for the next 5.5 years, I abused it. What happened was that I started to lose my business because I wasn't functioning anymore, and I really, you know, I screwed up. And what I did was I started losing my clients, and I started losing my income, but I wasn't losing my expenses. So without giving it a second's thought, I ripped off some money from some clients. Boom, like that. You know, everybody in the entertainment industry's biggest nightmare, that was me, you know. A business manager that ripped them off, and that's what I did. I had always prided myself on my honesty and my integrity. Always. I'd been offered kickbacks for years. We literally had tens of millions of dollars running through the accounts. I'd never stolen a nickel. I'd never set up dummy corporations. I'd never taken kickbacks. I'd never done any of that. But when I needed money, I just took it. Boom, like that, you know, without even giving it a thought. And it didn't take long. I got caught. It took a couple of years, and I got caught. And I'll tell you what happened. I got caught. It hit the front page of the LA Times because it was a Hollywood case and there were some actors involved. Hit the front page of the LA Times on the morning of my daughter's bat mitzvah. And I had to go to this party with 400 of my ex-wife's nearest and dearest friends, you know, and try to function. And I don't have much of a recollection of that point. But you see, I didn't get sober at that point. I lost everything at that. Whatever I had at that point, I lost. And I didn't get sober because, you see, I didn't have a problem with alcohol and drugs. My problem were people. If they just left me the hell alone, I'd be fine. Just leave me alone and I'd be fine. I was not a chapter 3 type of alcoholic. I was never remorseful. I never switched doing anything. I did basically the same thing day in and day out. And what happened, it was almost a year to the day later, I was in temple on a holiday called Yom Kippur. It's the holiest day in the Jewish religion. It is the day that we are there asking God to atone for our sins. And we sang this prayer, and I got very emotional over it, and I started to cry, and I turned to my girlfriend and my 2 kids, and I said, excuse me, I have to go to the bathroom. And I went into the bathroom, and I pulled out this little emergency stash of cocaine I used to carry for the many emergencies that would happen during a day, you know. And I was about to do a couple of toots when I said, why am I doing this? And I threw it out. Just threw it out. 18 years I've been drinking and doing drugs on a daily basis, and I just threw it out. I don't know why. I don't know what it was. I like to think it was the long arm of God that came out of that sky and just knocked that crap out of my hands, because I have no idea. And then I went and sat down. I didn't say anything to anybody because, you know, if whatever it was over with. And I started to feel a little weird, and about 3 days later, I really started to go crazy. And I called this guy that I knew, and he suggested I go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said I didn't think I was that bad. But for some reason or other, I was able to follow direction. And I followed direction, and I went to this meeting, and I want to tell you about my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. It was nothing like this. You guys look too good, you know. A couple of you guys don't, but for the most part, you guys look real good, you know. My first meeting was called the Whatever Meeting. It was on Sunset Boulevard in the old IATSE Union Hall, and I walked up the steps of this Union Hall, and there was some schmuck sitting on the steps, had his motorcycle boot off, holding a knife over his toes and dropping it, you know, and I didn't think anything was wrong. And I just walked on in, you know, and I was a changed person from that day, that minute. You know, before I got sober, I used to carry an Ingram 9mm machine pistol with a 47-shot clip and a silencer in the car with me at all times. You know, because they were out there and you had to be ready, you know. I want you to know that I only pulled that gun out once. Some punk cut me off at the gas station, took my pump. We all know it's a capital offense, right? So I reached under the seat and I pulled out Baby, it's what I used to call it, Baby, and I jammed the clip in and I cocked it and I pointed at him, and he did the only thing he could have done was he got the hell out of there. Because I don't know what I would have done. You know, I'd been up at that point for about 3 weeks driving around, you know, and I needed gas, and I just had no clue. Well, I no longer carried that gun. Actually, the district attorney had that gun, but that's one of the specific stories we won't talk about, you know. What I carried was a little Beretta. 8 in the clip, 1 in the chamber, right here, waist holster. Right here. 4.5 months. My first 4.5 months of sobriety, I carried that gun. I want to assure you that I never once pulled it out at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Not once. I reached for it a lot. Awful lot. Pulled my jacket back and showed you the gun, you know, but I never pulled it out. I just never pulled it out. I got a sponsor after a few months. It was great. It was great. He told me he wanted me to do a couple of things. He said, I want you to go to the mirror every morning and say good morning to yourself. I said, I can do that, you know. So I did, except I added something. I added the word asshole. You know, because that's what I thought of myself, you know, and somewhere I noticed between 4.5 and 5 years of sobriety one day, I wasn't saying the word asshole anymore. I was just saying good morning to myself, and I still say good morning to myself. The next thing he said he wanted me to do was he wanted me to leap out of bed, bound out of bed actually is what he said, and make it so you can't get back in it. And I was shocked. I was just shocked. I thought, how does this guy know that my biggest fear is getting out of bed? And 3 days later, he said, we went out to lunch, and he shared with me, and he said, you know, Harvey, I want to tell you what my biggest fear is. He said, my biggest fear is getting out of bed in the morning. I know that I'm a fraud, and I know that everybody's going to find out. And I'm just deathly afraid of getting out of bed. And I was shocked, because I thought I was the only one in the world that ever felt like that. I did not know there was anybody else that had that same feeling. You know, it was incredible. He was a wonderful guy. God has put some incredible people in my life. I remember I asked him one time, I said, listen, man, how long do I got to go to these damn meetings for? You know, and he didn't give me that pat answer, oh, until you want to. He said 1.5 years. I said 1.5 years. He said 1.5 years. I said I can do that. You know, and I didn't think to ask him why he was still going to meetings after 4 years. You know, it never dawned on me to ask the guy that, but that's what I did. When I had 17 months of sobriety, I finally had to go to court for the final disposition of this case of mine that we'd now delayed for 2.5 years. And I finally had to go. In the meantime, I'd gotten sober, and you know, it was incredible. And you've all heard these AA miracle stories before. I went there. There were 10 or 12 people in courtroom with me that day to give me support. You know, Neil B, who gave a cake to my friend Don, was one of the guys that was there with me, and the judge had 50 letters from people in this program attesting to what a wonderful person I had become. You know. He looked down at me and he said, you know, Harvey, I want to congratulate you on your obviously sincere attempt to rehabilitate yourself. And I hope that after this hearing, you continue along that path. And I thought, wow, man, this is wonderful. And then he banged that gavel down and sentenced me to 5 years in state penitentiary. And away I went. It was terrible. I took the second half of the first step right then. You know, they put me in a little holding cell right behind the courtroom, and I knew what it felt like, that my life was unmanageable. Up until that point, I'd not really taken the second half of that step. Took it then. I was back in his courtroom 3 months later on what's called a sentence modification. He knocked a year off, so I had a net of 4, and basically in California in those days we did roughly half-time. I did 21 months in state penitentiary and 5.5 months in a work-furlough halfway house. It's the reason I'm sober today. It's the reason that I'm alive. There's no doubt in my mind. You know, I needed a place to go to make the amends that I couldn't make. You know, I needed a place to go to knock all of my omnipotence and most of my arrogance out. I needed a place to go where people could prove to me that I was worthy of being loved. I used to get 20 to 25 letters a week from people in this program. Every week, people would come visit me. Every few weeks, this friend of mine would pack his car full of newcomers and bring them down. You know, he'd say, "You think you guys got it rough? Let's go visit Harv." You know, and boom, and down they'd go. I want to tell you how lame I was. I'd never been arrested. Never been arrested before. You know, I went in there. I was in county jail for a while until we caught the chain to the joint, which I'll explain to you how, you know, it's cool to do that. But I was in county jail and I had no idea what was going on. As a matter of fact, for the first 3 days, I had to keep on correcting everybody. They were mispronouncing my name. My name is Harvey. They kept on referring to me as homie, you know, and I had no idea until finally some guy called me Homer. And I looked at him and I said, man, no Jew in the history of mankind has ever been called Homer, you know. And then I got it, you know. We caught the chain to the joint. Let me tell you what catching the chain to the joint is. They handcuff a bunch of fools to this long chain, toss their butts on a bus, and drive them the hour to the joint. You know, this is really thrilling to me, you know. We were all bad doing that, except they didn't do that with me. I was on crutches. I'd had my leg operated on. So they didn't want to put this fat old Jew, I was like 60 pounds heavier than I am now. They didn't want to put this fat old Jew in the back of the bus with everybody. They figured they'd take away my crutches and beat the crap out of me with them. So they put me in this little room on the bus, which I thought was very sweet of them, you know. I found out that later that that's the high-powered room, so for about 3 weeks, everybody thought I was some sort of Jewish serial killer, and they left me alone, you know. God, it was strange. Just strange. Just strange. I'd been down about a month, and I was lying on my bunk. I was on this transit yard, which is dorm living, which was just the worst. I mean, I never thought I'd be praying for a cell, you know, but which I was. But I was on this transit yard, and all of a sudden, I was lying on the bunk, and I felt the bunk shake, and I looked up, and I knew that life as I had lived it was gone forever. Standing over me was this huge guy, had his shirt off, all buffed up. Everybody in the joint worked out with weights, just huge. Not me, but everybody else did, you know, just huge, you know. He had the 3-leaf clover over his right or left breast, which signifies the Aryan Brotherhood. He had lightning bolts tattooed all over his body. He had Oildale tattooed over his belly button. Oildale's this little city outside of Bakersfield. It's the only city in California that has its own Ku Klux Klan clubhouse, you know. He's got SWP tattooed under his belly button for Supreme White Power. And he looks down at me, and I look up at him, and I detect what I think is a little glint of love in his eye, you know. And he says to me, he says, "Is your name Harvey?" Now, Harvey is what my pain-in-the-ass mother calls me, you know, and has been since I was a kid. You know, it's if you know the definition of a Jewish mother, multiply it 1,000-fold, and there's my mom, you know. And I looked at this guy and I said, "My name's Harvey. Where did you get Harvey?" He said, "Well, your mother told my grandmother and mother I'm supposed to talk to you." Now, what had happened was my mother ran into this guy's grandmother and mother on the visiting yard, and as is her wont, she talks to everybody. She says, "What is your son in for?" And they said, "Drugs and alcohol." And she said, "Isn't that a coincidence? So is my Harvey." 6,000 guys in these joints. You know, my mom thinks we're the only two with a problem, but she doesn't know, you know. And she said, but you ought to have your son talk to my Harvela, because my Harvela's clean and sober and has been for a year and a half, and maybe he can help you. And that's what he was coming to talk to me about. I got even with him. I brought him into the Jewish temple, put a little yarmulke on him, you know. A tallis around him, you know. I said, hey man, that's what we got to do if you want to stay sober. Come at me with that Aryan Brotherhood shit. You know, I'm going to do whatever I can to come back. And I'd like to tell you he stayed sober. You know, I've tried to get hold of him and I haven't been able. I went back into the joint, if you can believe this. I went back in 3 years after I got out for a banquet with a buddy of mine that I helped get sober, which is really weird. This guy had done 25 years in prisons, and he's now sober a little bit over 10 years. And he was running the methadone clinic for the county of Ventura for a while, you know. But anyway, he and I went back in, and we actually they let us walk into the joint, which was really weird. We walked in, and there were like 40 guys standing out there waiting to say hey to me. You know, nobody says hi. It's hey, hey. Used to call me Had Money, you know. Hey, Had Money. I'll tell you a little aside to that. One of the guys that I was in with, who was a wonderful guy. He was a bodyguard, you know, but he was a bodyguard for drug deals, but he was a bodyguard. He has written a script that evidently they bought the treatment, so hopefully he'll do the script. He calls me up one day and he says, hey, listen, man, can I use your name in my script? And I thought about it for a minute and I said, okay, you can use my first name, but I don't want you using my last name. He said, man, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Had Money, you know. So I can just imagine one of these days, you know, I'm gonna say this at a meeting and somebody's gonna come up to me and say, you stole that out of a movie, you know. But anyway, Randy that was this guy's name, had just gotten out one more time and had sent a kite to me to say that this time he was going to stay sober with the church. And I hope to God he's sober. It was a long time ago, and I haven't been able to get hold of him. I'll tell you another thing that happened to me. I was never sure why I got sober. I didn't know if I got sober for me. Well, I knew I didn't get sober for me. For my girlfriend, for my kids, for my parents, for the courts, for why. I just didn't know why I got sober. And my first Christmas in there, I was sitting in my cell by myself. My cellie was on a family visit with his wife, so you know what he was doing. And I'm sitting in this cell waiting, and I'll tell you what we get on Christmas Eve. This is what we get. We get a box of stale cookies baked the previous March, and a Christmas card from Dr. Robert Schuller at the Crystal Cathedral that says, Jesus loves you and so do I, you know. And then you crack a tooth on one of Bob's stale cookies, and I'm sitting there, and a guy walks into my cell, and he said, Harvey, I just want to thank you. I'd done him a couple of favors. He said, Merry Christmas, and he put a quart of Jack Daniels down on my bunk. Boom, just put it down. 10 minutes it took me. I looked at that bottle for 10 minutes, and I knew that I could drink it, and nobody would know. Nobody would know. And then I realized that I would know. And I got up and I walked down the tier and I walked into a homeboy of mine's cell. I knew how to use the word now. And I walked into a homeboy of mine's cell and I said, Merry Christmas, homie. And I put it down and he said, man, I owe you. And I said, yes, you do, you know. And that's it, because that's how it was done. And then I knew that I was sober for myself and I wasn't sober for anybody else. I got out of there. I went to this work furlough house that allowed me to assimilate back into society, to reestablish my relationship, start going to meetings again. I was scared to death, you know. People thought that I should be relieved and happy to get out, and I wasn't. I was full of fear, and as I say, my fear is manifested by rage because I had no idea what was going to happen to me. I had no idea. I wanted to try to rebuild a tax practice, and I had no idea if I could do that, you know. And it was incredible, and I was full of fear. I remember I'd been out for about a year and a half, and I went home one night, got home from a meeting, and Patty was in school. She was going to school at the time, and I sat down on the couch, and I realized for the first time in my life, I was sober now 5 years. I'd been out of the penitentiary for a year and a half. I was 44 years old. And for the first time in my life, I went through an entire day without any fear. An entire day without any fear. It blew me away. It gave me so much hope I couldn't believe it. Now, the very next day, I was back into fear again. And I've learned now when that happens what to do, and I've been able to get out of it quickly. I don't wait. I have this very loving, caring, gentle sponsor. You know, he's this cantankerous old fart that's been sober for years, and he's a former appellate court justice, and he just, you know, grates my butt sometimes, and I don't care, because this guy knows me very well. You know, he's now been my sponsor for 9 years, and he's my 4th sponsor, and this is the guy that knows me better than anybody else. My second sponsor was a guy that I got in the penitentiary. It was a guy named Bill Haywood, whose story's in the NA Big Book. Bill Haywood was a black guy in a prison that is a total segregated society. And this guy, I learned to trust. He's the man that I read an inventory to, that I was the most honest to, and I learned how to trust him. You know, until I was able to trust a human being, I wasn't able to trust a being that wasn't human. And that's what happened to me. I wasn't able to trust in God until I was able to trust in people. And this guy made such an impact on me, because he was the most loving, caring, sensitive man that I'd ever met in my life. You know, and he allowed me to read all of my crap and give him my secrets. That's what I've found in this program, is that when I give up my secrets, I'm a better person. When I have secrets, I'm crazy. 6.5 years ago, a good friend of mine, my very best friend actually, told me that his lover was dying of AIDS. He's gay, and he told me his lover was dying of AIDS. And Patty and I spent a lot of time with them, and we watched Hector die. And he died about 6 months later, and Patty and I spent the weekend with Michael, and then Monday was a funeral, and we went to this funeral and came back to his house afterwards, and we spent the day and most of the evening there, and we got ready to leave that night, and Michael came up to us and hugged us and kissed us and said, you know, I couldn't have gotten through this without you. He said, Harvey, he said, you are the kindest, gentlest, most loving, caring, sensitive man that I know, and I love you for it. And I thought, and we left, and I said to Patty, I said, you know, Bill, my very first sponsor, said to me to make a list of the kind of man I wanted to become, and I looked at him like he was nuts. And I said, man, what are you talking about? I am the kind of man I wanted to become. I'm this cold, hard, unemotional asshole. You know, it's something I'd been striving for all my life. It was my role model, my dad. And through working the steps of this program and trying to live by the principles, and through no conscious effort on my part, because I still don't see that, I'm not that person. You know, my sponsor is very quick to point out the asshole slips that I have, you know, but for the most part, they don't. When I got sober, 95% of my actions were inappropriate. Today, 95% of my actions are appropriate. You know, that's the biggest change in me, and it's amazing. It just amazes me. Watching Hector die and seeing the dignity and the strength and the courage that he went through the last days of his life and his death gave me the strength to make the last 2 major amends that I had to make. One of them was to a client that didn't get reimbursed by insurance. There were 3 clients, 2 got paid by insurance, 1 did not. And I called him on the phone, and he answered the phone, and I told him who it was, and he said, what do you want? And I said, I need a mailing address for you. I said, I belong to a 12-step program of recovery, and one of the steps of that program is we make moral and financial amends, and I want to start sending you a check, and I will send you a check every month for the rest of my life. I'll never be able to repay you, but I want to send you a check. And he said to me, he said, Harvey, he said, I've never wanted any money from you. All I've ever wanted was an apology. I thought that was very sweet. It wasn't very true, but it was very sweet. Because I remember a letter being read in open court, something about welding the door shut, you know, after I got in. But I didn't feel I had to remind him of that, so I just apologized to him. And then he said something that blew me away. He said, I want you to know something. I said, what's that? He said, a friend of mine heard you speak at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm proud of you. And I just lost it. I just lost it. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that somebody could have that kind of compassion for me. You know, I've learned how to be compassionate by people being compassionate to me. I've learned how to be forgiving by people forgiving me. I've learned how to love by people loving me, and I've learned how to be a friend by people befriending me. I knew none of that when I got sober. Absolutely none of that. The last major amends that I had to make was to the Internal Revenue Service. I know I'm the only one in this room that has a tax problem, so, you know, I'm sorry about that. But I owed them $3.5 million, you know. And I didn't have the wherewithal or the strength or the financial credibility to ever make that kind of money, so I made them an offer. I offered them millicents on the dollar. It's called an offer in compromise, which they promptly rejected, and then I appealed it. And it took them about a year to hear this appeal, and I went down. And the night before I was going downtown L.A. to the appellate division for this settlement conference, Patty asked me what I was going to say to them. And I said, you know what, honey, I have no idea. So I think I'm going to go in there, and in a general way, I'm going to tell them what I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm like today, because I don't know what else to do, you know. And that's what I did. I went in there and I sat down and I told them that. And And he looked at me and he said, you know, Harvey, you're an inspiration, and if everything is true and we'll do an investigation, you know, we'll have a deal. And I knew everything was true, because I just, there's no gray area with me anymore. You know, it either is or it isn't, and I do that. And it took about 9 months, 10 months, the following February the 26th. Now, the reason that I know it was February 26th is February 26th is the anniversary of the day I got sentenced to the penitentiary. So I'm sitting in my office at home, I work at home, at my desk, with my morning cup of coffee, looking at my mugshot. You know, go figure. You know, I don't know. I'm looking at this damn mugshot, and the phone rings, and it's this guy from the Internal Revenue Service. And I said, yeah. He said, everything's been approved. The paperwork's in the mail. As soon as you get it, you can start making your payments. It's a 5-year deal, 60 months, 5-year deal. March the 1st, 1996, I made payment number 60. It's over with. It's over with, you know? There's light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not always an oncoming train. Sometimes it's the light at the end of the tunnel, you know? A few years ago, I did something I swore I'd never do. I was back in the criminal courts division, or criminal courts building, downtown Los Angeles, in Superior Court, actually in Judge Lance Ito's court, you know, before he became famous or infamous or whatever the hell he is, you know. And I was back in his courtroom, and I was applying for what's called a certificate of rehabilitation. It is the first step in being granted a pardon. You know, and he granted me this thing, and I walked down the block to Don's office. It was, at that point, it was just a few blocks away, and I walked into his office, and tears were coming down, and he was saying, "Are those tears of gratitude?" And I said, "No, I'm just overwhelmed. I can't believe that I'm really on this road to having this damn thing finished, you know. In about a year, I'm going to have a pardon. Let me tell you what a pardon's going to do for me. It'll allow me to own a rifle. Never a handgun, but a rifle. And run for public office." Now, they can't dig up any more dirt on me, you know, so I'm thinking of actually doing both. Just for the hell of it. I mean, you know, some school board, I don't know, junior college board, just for the hell of it. I'll lose, but run anyway, you know. It'd be a kick. I have no idea. I want to tell you about one thing that happened to me. When I first got out of the penitentiary, I was doing tax returns, and I was doing them illegally, because I was afraid to apply to be relicensed by the state of California. And I was afraid because there's a question on that application. It says, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And I can't lie, I wasn't going to lie. But I was too full of fear to check it off. And finally, after 2 years, something happened to me. I realized something. I realized that I cannot handle guilt. Guilt is the one emotion that I can't handle. So I do something about it. So I got this damn application, you know, and I filled it out. And when I got to the part about have you ever been convicted of a felony, I checked yes, and then panicked, and I called my sponsor. And my sponsor said to me, he said, you know, Harvey, we can use Alcoholics Anonymous as a shield, not as a sword. Tell them, see attached letter, and then write them a letter and tell them what you used to be like, what happened, and what you're like today. And that's what I did, you know, and then sent it off. And 6 weeks later, I got the license in the mail. You know, no what a guys, no nothing. I just got the license in the mail. I was all prepared to appeal it and do everything, and I didn't have to. I just got it. It just came in the mail. You know, it just amazed me. It absolutely amazed me. 6 years ago, God, I can't believe that it's 6 years already. 6 years ago, we went to our first international convention, and that was in Seattle. I was away on my sabbatical for the one before that, so I couldn't go. But we went to this convention in Seattle, and we went to a meeting that absolutely changed my life. And I didn't want to be there. It was one of the small meetings with about 1,000 people, 1,200 people, you know, and they're all sitting in there, and they had 3 speakers, and the first speaker got up, and I didn't like the guy. He gave a good talk, but something about him just really annoyed me. And near the end of the talk, he talked about how he was retiring, you know, that he was a warden in an Ohio penitentiary, and I knew it, you know. I just knew that I didn't like the punk, you know. It just got me. The next woman that got up was this woman that gets up with a heavy Brooklyn accent. Her name was BB from New York. Now, I always give her credit. I know in Alcoholics Anonymous, you only have to give credit twice, then you can take it as your own. But with my ego, I've got to give BB credit all the time. She said something that changed my life. She said that she believes that God gives 3 answers, not 2. I always thought God gave 2 answers, yes and no. No is a viable answer. I've never been able to accept a no, and I've still not. So I stopped asking for anything specific. She said that she believes God gives 3 answers. Yes, not now, and I have something better in store for you. Isn't that wonderful? Yes, not now, and I have something better in store for you. I accepted it immediately. It knocked me out. Just knocked me out. That was my first thought, was I accepted it immediately. My second thought was, you know, Harvey, you're a pretty bright guy. How come you can't come up with stuff like this? You know, but I'm sober. I didn't say I wasn't self-obsessed, you know, and it's just the way it is. What's happened to me, I've been sober now for 12 years and 9 months. What's happened to me in those 12 years and 9 months is that I've learned, other than serious illness and death, I can walk through anything. Absolutely walk through anything. I won't like the walk because I haven't liked the walk yet. I haven't liked any of the walks that I've had to go through. I usually won't like the results. I've never liked the results. You know, I leave the results in God's hands, but I've really never liked the results until later on when I've realized it. But the single most important thing to me is that I will never have to make that walk alone. And for that, I'll always be grateful. Thanks for listening.
Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. And if that shows up, the gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.